It was the beginning of the 20th century. Immigrants and entrepreneurs flooded into the city of Winnipeg, a frontier boomtown. The city was flush with the profits of a rapidly expanding wholesale and retail trade, and enterprising individuals were building their fortunes from railway and grain money. This influx gave rise to a new and powerful social elite who craved the trappings of modern life and the entertainment afforded to cities in the East. In February of 1907, a new center of art and entertainment was opening. 1,700 patrons packed a luxurious hall and waited with anticipation as the house lights dimmed. With this performance, the vision of a former printing apprentice, Corliss Walker, became a reality. The era of the Walker Theatre had begun. C.P. Walker was an American, born in Vermont in 1853. His family followed the expansion out west, and in 1861, they moved to the frontier town of Rochester, Minnesota. Walker wasn't interested in the homesteader's life, and he eventually decided to apprentice in the printing industry. It was the printing of playbills that sparked his interest in a different business: live entertainment.
As well as being a very sharp businessman, Walker was, according to his daughter, a very devoted card player, gambler, and there's something about showbiz. Not only there was money to be made, but there were risks to be taken that obviously appealed to Walker.
After managing a series of shows, singers, and sporting events, Walker began acquiring and managing theaters throughout the Midwest. Then he expanded north. In 1897, he leased the Winnipeg Theatre from Confederation Life and added it to his growing empire.
According to Walker's daughter, it was Jim Hill, the president of the Northern Pacific Railway, that persuaded Walker to go to Winnipeg. He said, "Listen, this is going to become another Chicago."
When Walker traveled to Winnipeg, he brought his wife, Harriet, an ex-child star and theater expert, who everyone called Hattie.
She was highly intelligent and a gifted writer. When she married Walker and Walker began to make plans for his theater empire, she took over the PR work. She virtually wrote all of the advance publicity. When CP came to Winnipeg, it was right in the middle of a population boom. The figures are, in 1891, the population of Winnipeg was 25,000. By 1901, it was 42,000. And by 1911, it was 136. And by the time Walker came, you had a substantial middle class with family units. This put a terrific pressure on theater to change from a kind of a burlesque sort of variety where the clergy quite rightly said the theater is just an extension of the saloon and the brothel, to the possibility that there might be something you could take your wives and daughters to.
Walker revolutionized the theater business in Winnipeg. Before his arrival, most live entertainment acts were booked out of St. Paul. Walker did his booking through the powerful New York Syndicate, which provided the Winnipeg Theatre with entertainment that Walker's competitors found impossible to compete with. Walker's biggest competition at the time was an established hall on McDermott Avenue known as the Grand Opera House.
The Grand Opera House was not particularly grand. It was a converted warehouse, and it was run by a couple of ex-contractors called Seach and Sharp. They really made a very spirited attempt to compete with Walker.
Faced with Walker's powerful New York connections, Seach and Sharp decided to form their own stock company, performing shows with the Grand Opera House as their home. Their star performer was an actor and elocution teacher from Ontario named Harold Nelson, who starred in and produced many plays for the Grand. Nelson decided that in order to survive, the theater needed to take a gamble. He would produce a lavish and expensive production of Cyrano de Bergerac. The production was an abysmal failure, and the final nail in the coffin for the already floundering Grand Opera House. Devastated by the failed production, the Grand closed its doors for good, and Nelson was welcomed with open arms into Walker's theatrical family.
December 30th of 1903, the New York Syndicate had just completed a theater in Chicago called the Iroquois. There was a matinee performance with many women and children. Fire broke out, and it turned out that the theater was not fire safe. Many of the fire escapes had not been installed. People walked out of doors thinking they were going onto a fire escape. They fell in a great heap on the floor. 602 people died, and it became the scandal of the continent. The immediate effect of the Iroquois fire was not only for weeks it was headlines in major newspapers, but theaters were simply closed down all over the United States. Walker had good political friends and used them, and he managed to escape being closed down until his lease on the Winnipeg ran out. And by that time, he had a good beginning on the construction of the theater that was to become the Walker.
In 1905, Walker purchased a parcel of land, and construction soon began on a completely fireproof theater that would replace the Winnipeg. Walker had his new building designed with steel cage construction, and the entire structure was brick and mortar, making the cost 10 times what regular buildings were constructed for. Unheard of at the time, an entire sprinkler system was installed, even though Winnipeg's water system did not have the strength to power it.
The Walker Theatre, when it opened in 1906, was an absolute wonder. It was steel cage construction. The finishing was largely masonry, and there was simply no place for a fire to start. It was judged by everyone who saw it as being the leading fire-safe theater in North America. As well as this, of course, there was the size of it, the luxury of it, the vision as a kind of a temple to the arts. Its huge stage and its really luxurious auditorium and multiple balconies, and its ladies' powder room and men's smoking room, and all of the trappings you'd expect of an exclusive club made large, really did strike the Winnipeg elite as being a symbol of the gentility that you could have in this city that people in the East thought of as a frontier city. It was a theater for the carriage trade, but it was a theater in which the carriage trade could feel absolutely safe. And it filled Winnipeg with pride, a pride that lasted through the rest of the history of theater in Winnipeg.
Walker had built a world-class facility that would stage world-class entertainment. Besides being lavishly comfortable, the theater was technologically years ahead of its time. The Walker had an advanced cooling and temperature control system. The basement underneath the orchestra level contained iron ducts and coke screens. Great fans blew air through the screens as water dripped on them. The air would then pass to the seating area through holes under the seats. This system would humidify the air through Winnipeg's cold and dry winters. In the summers, the room would be filled with ice, and it would bring the building's temperature down to a comfortable 18 degrees Celsius. Over top of the balcony was an area referred to as the Gods for the theater's less affluent patrons. There was no maximum capacity, and audiences high above the stage often sat on each other's laps or on the stairs. No one would be turned away. This second balcony had its own private entrance, bereft of creature comforts and decoration.
Those gods are very carefully constructed. They're purposely uncomfortable so that nobody who can afford $2 would go up and sit there. But the idea was that when you brought in a Shakespeare company, or when you brought in an opera company, or you brought in a first-rate New York show, the working people could come in as well. And hopefully the gentility of the whole ritual would rub off on them. Because there was still this idea that somehow there could be one theater for everybody, and that the working class would in fact be greatly benefited if they were to take part in some of the cultural activities of the more privileged, and that you didn't necessarily have to share the wealth with them.
Dad spoke very highly of the Walkers. In the winter, he worked at the Walker Theatre, I imagine as a caretaker, and in the summer, Mr. Walker owned the signboards, and he worked on the signboards. He would get passes, and Mother took me to the Walker. Oh, that was a place to go. They came in evening gowns. That's why Mother and I stood at the side to see these people come in, because they were beautifully dressed. You know, it was a treat.
With the opening of the Walker Theatre, Walker became not only in fact a leading theater manager, but he was theater business in Winnipeg. The Walkers were very much a part of the social elite. This was the life that not only that they lived, but that their prospective patrons lived. They ran a theater for the carriage trade. Every time an opera company came in, there would be ads in the newspaper from the Walker Theatre telling people where they could have their coachmen park their carriages, and what side streets would be available so that they would be ready for them when they came out again. Between the opening of the Walker and the First World War, the Walker was booking the finest entertainment available in North America. The syndicate was sending to the Walker pretty generally the full set of touring shows based on the previous year's New York shows. So it was possible in Winnipeg throughout the year to see from 2 to 3 changes of shows in a week of first-rate New York shows with all the leading stars.
Walker had a sophisticated propaganda campaign arranged with the local media. Town Topics was a society paper run by Free Press drama critic Charles Hanscom. The paper did theater criticism and devoted many pages to happenings at the Walker Theatre. Readers of the magazine would often come across articles and reviews written by a Rosa sub. Rosa was none other than Harriet Walker, and her column The Matinee Girl was widely read by Winnipeg theater patrons.
Although there's a great question of conflict of interest here, I have to say that she was probably one of the sharpest and best critics we ever had in this city. She became very much respected as a newspaper woman, and in fact was one of the founders of the Winnipeg branch of the Canadian Women's Press Club. It was here that she became a very close friend of Cora Hines, the agricultural writer for the Winnipeg Free Press, of Nellie McClung, and she joined with them in fighting for women's suffrage and other causes.
By the advent of World War I, Walker had risen to the position of president of the North American Theatrical Organization. His entire circuit of theaters enjoyed the best shows from around the world and played them to full houses. No one realized that the fall of this empire was already in sight and disaster was on the horizon. Motion pictures would deal the final blow to the theater industry as they gained a grip on worldwide entertainment.
In 1930, Famous Players issued an edict to all of its theater managers that they were forbidden to have any live entertainment on their stages. Since Famous Players owned most of the theaters in Canada where live entertainment could be staged, this meant virtually a death to any touring live entertainment. You could not have a touring show or a touring company on the Walker stage, for instance, unless you could also book it into other cities. And in some cities, no theater was available.
In 1930, Walker created the Walker Repertory Company. Creating his own shows was a way to deal with a lack of touring companies. He staged many plays and light operas. But this move came too late, and in 1936, the theater was sold for taxes owing.
The reason that CP didn't fight any longer was that he was by this time in his 80s. He lived on and still thought of the theater as his theater until 1942 when he died. Harriet appeared in a one-woman show in this period just to convince people she wasn't dead yet. There were newspaper articles written about her. She could still give a very trenchant interview and never hesitated to express her opinion on things. She outlived her husband for 1 year and she died in 43.
Walker never saw his theater in its next incarnation. From 1945 to 1989, the Walker was known as the Odeon Movie Theatre and was heavily renovated to accommodate movie audiences. Corliss and Hattie Walker disappeared from the minds of Winnipeggers, their legacy a distant memory. A whole generation would grow up knowing the theater only as a great movie house. They'd have recollections of the first movie they saw there, and the magnificent old theater that somehow remained a palace, even through its metamorphosis.
The effect of the Walker Theatre operation on Winnipeg's cultural life is enormous. I think that the Walkers really, through their provision of high-quality theater through all of those years, until the people in Winnipeg expected it as their right, created a theater audience, number one, which would accept nothing but the kind of shows that you could see in New York. And secondly, Walker's success as a businessman created a theater community that said you should be able to run this efficiency and you should make money. The idea that a frontier city could have seasons of Shakespeare, could have seasons of opera, and could in fact see the plays of Ibsen. Very shortly after the turn of the century, could see the plays of Shaw and Tolstoy, meant that there was an idea of theater, I think, built right into the Winnipeg psyche, which would not compromise later. There's something about Winnipeg that really cottoned on to somebody like C.P. Walker. He was enough of a business shark to get the admiration of the businessman. He was in an industry which was connected with culture and gentility, and he had a wife that was able to exploit that whole area like nobody else could. So that as Walker tended to the business, and Harriet attended to the culture, they became very important to Winnipeg, and I think Winnipeg became very important to them. They never changed their citizenship, but they did deeply involve themselves in Winnipeg affairs. And there was no question about it. While they weren't Canadians, they were Winnipeggers.
After almost half a century as a movie house, a group of dedicated volunteers carried out the Walker Theatre's renovation and reopening. It was a concert venue, and in 2002, it became the Burton Cummings Theatre for the Performing Arts. Winnipeggers came once again to the building that embodied so much of the city's cultural heritage. C.P. Walker's Palace had been rebuilt once again.